You know, there's this quiet truth that a lot of men feel but almost never say out loud. After a certain age, dating, it just doesn't feel exciting anymore. It starts to feel, well, exhausting. For a growing number of older men, the thought of starting all over again is actually way worse than the thought of just staying alone. And today, we're going to dig into why that is.
Now, right away, the immediate assumption is that these guys must be bitter, right? Or resentful, or maybe just lonely. But what if that's missing the point completely? What if this choice isn't about giving up at all, but about a huge, fundamental shift in what they value?
This quote just nails it. This isn't about being weak or holding a grudge. It's about the hard-won lessons that only experience can teach you. So let's really break down what that experience looks and feels like.
So our first big idea here is what we're calling the price of experience. For a lot of older men, dating isn't some fresh start. No, it's an activity that carries the cumulative weight of every single breakup, every divorce, every betrayal that came before it.
And you can kind of break this price down into three parts, what we'll call a threefold toll. First up, you've got emotional fatigue. Then there's this really heightened awareness of emotional risk. And finally, there's the quiet weight of emotional scar tissue. Let's start with the fatigue.
So what is emotional fatigue? Well, it's not about being tired of people, not at all. It's about being tired of the process. It's that feeling of exhaustion you get from explaining yourself over and over, having the same first date conversations, and putting in a real emotional investment only to watch it all just dissolve. It's the fatigue of starting from square one again and again.
This right here, this gets to the absolute heart of that fatigue. I mean, once you've poured your soul into something, a long-term relationship, a marriage, and you've watched it just collapse, you're going to be a lot more careful about building again. And that caution, that speaks directly to that second toll, emotional risk. It's this sober, clear-eyed understanding that opening yourself up means you could get really hurt again. Which of course leads to the third toll, scar tissue. These aren't open wounds anymore, but they're those tender spots from past battles that just make you think twice before jumping into a new one. In all this caution, it leads directly to our second point, a massive shift in what these men value. You could call it a change in their personal currency. The goal is no longer about chasing excitement, it's about protecting their peace.
Just think about the contrast for a second. When you're younger, dating is so often driven by trying to get something from the outside world. You want validation, you want excitement, you're chasing the hope of some perfect future. But with age, that focus turns inward. The goals become things like peace, stability, and just plain authenticity. So here's the crucial thing to understand. A lot of these older guys have finally built something that was so hard to find when they were younger, a stable life. You know, quiet mornings, predictable routines, a real sense of control. From that perspective, a new relationship can look less like an opportunity and more like a potential bomb going off in the middle of it. They don't fear being lonely, they fear disruption.
But look, it's not just the men who've changed. Dating itself has been completely transformed. So for our third section, let's look at how the mechanics of this modern dating maze add a whole other layer of complexity to this decision.
The whole culture has shifted. What used to feel like a search for a real connection now often just feels like consumption. You know, swipe culture, endless options, always comparing. It can make relationships feel totally disposable. It makes people and the attention they give you feel like they can be replaced in a heartbeat.
And living in that kind of environment creates this really predictable and honestly disheartening pattern that so many older men start to recognize. It kicks off with intense interest, which then sometimes turns into a sense of entitlement, and then, just as fast as it started, the attraction just fades away. Seeing this cycle on repeat doesn't necessarily make them cynical, it just makes them realistic.
And that realism, it leads to a pretty rational cost-benefit analysis. They see how fast attention can be replaced, how easily people seem to move on in today's world. And so they start to ask themselves a very simple, very logical question. Is the potential reward here really worth the almost certain emotional cost?
And all of this brings us to the ultimate conclusion. This is the point where all these different factors, the fatigue, the risk, the modern dating world, they all converge into a single powerful decision. It's that moment when one value just rises above everything else. Okay, and we need to be really clear about this part. This decision to opt out, it is not rooted in anger or misogyny. It is not about hating women or being resentful about past relationships.
It's not about that at all. Instead, it's about valuing themselves. It's a profound act of self-preservation. It's about finally understanding their own boundaries, knowing what costs too much emotionally, and just having the courage to protect their own well-being.
And this is the bottom line. This is the one, single, non-negotiable term. After decades of emotional ups and downs, peace becomes more valuable than companionship that lacks respect. It becomes more valuable than a love that lacks stability. Peace becomes the ultimate priority.
So, you see, when an older man says he'd rather stay alone, what he's often really saying is that he's finally achieved his deep sense of clarity. It's not a statement of sadness or defeat. It's a declaration of knowing what truly matters to him and what he's just not willing to sacrifice anymore.
And that kind of leaves us all with a final thought to chew on. We live in this world that's constantly screaming at us with endless options for connection, for excitement, for more. But this whole perspective really forces us to ask a much deeper question. In the middle of all that noise, what is the real, lasting value of our own peace?